All right, I promised you we were going to talk about 457B plans. So let's talk about those. 457B. This is different from a 401k and a 403B. Okay? Think of a 457B as deferred compensation. It's technically still your employer's money. They just haven't paid it to you yet. Because of that, you haven't had to pay taxes on it yet. Most of the time. They also have a Roth option for 457Bs, but most of the time it's a tax deferred investing account. The nice thing about it is, despite the fact that the employer hasn't actually paid it to you yet, you still get to control the investments, just like you would in a 401k or a 403b. And most of the time, they're similar mutual funds. They're all getting better over time, lower costs, more index funds, and these sorts of plans, and you can control the investments. And the money grows in a tax protected way, like any other retirement account, until you take the money out, at which point, you pay taxes on it, unless it's the Roth option. But the difference between a 401k and a 403b and a 457b is that it's not your money yet. So it's technically not available to your creditors. So that's great for your own asset protection. Not so great for your employer's asset protection. Technically, if your employer were not doing well, we're going bankrupt, there's a possibility you could lose that money because it goes from your employer to some other creditor. Now, I have yet to meet a physician that this has actually happened to. And there's lots of docs out there whose employer is not in a good place and they have a 457B with them. So if you know anybody that actually lost 457B money due to an employer issue, I'd actually love to hear from them, or at least hear about them, because I haven't met one yet in all my years doing this. But it is a risk. It's really only a risk with non-governmental 457Bs. Lots of 457Bs are governmental. The employer is the state or the federal government, or actually, I don't know if the federal government has any 457Bs, but it's usually a state government or a municipal government or something like that that's offering this 457B. And those are a little bit better protected, right? They have a few other advantages as well. They're better protected because that entity usually has the ability to tax, and so your municipality isn't going out of business like a hospital could. But the other advantage of these governmental 457Bs is when you leave, because they have the option to be rolled into an IRA or another 401k or something like that. Instead of the only option for a non-governmental 457B is to be rolled into another non-governmental 457B. And that just isn't always available. It probably usually isn't available. And so you're stuck with the other options to get your money out. And sometimes there aren't good options. So a plan might allow you to take all the money out over 10 years or to wait until you're 65 before you start taking it out. It might give you some decent options, but occasionally I'll run into one that somebody has where all the money has to come out in the year you leave the employer. And if you saved up $400,000 in that 457B and you have to take it all out in 1 year, well, you're going to pay taxes on that, mostly in the top tax bracket, if not the top one or two tax brackets. So that's not actually a great deal for a lot of people. So the first thing you look at when deciding whether to use a non-governmental 457B is, what are the withdrawal options? And is there an acceptable one there? If it lets you spread it out over 5 or 10 years, that's probably okay. If it lets you leave it in there for a few years before you have to start taking it out, that's probably okay. But the point is, you want some options to get that money out. If it's a governmental 457B, just treat it like an extra 401k. That's all it is. Okay, the second thing to look at is the investment options. And if they're absolutely terrible, maybe you don't want to use a 457B. And when I'm talking about absolutely terrible, I'm talking about like expense ratios of 2% plus. And there just aren't very many of these left out there. Most employers and their advisors have realized that this is a serious fiduciary risk to offer terrible retirement plans to your employees. And so there's not that many that are just absolutely awful anymore. But you want to look at the fees, you want to look at the expenses, you want to look at the investment options and make sure those are okay. And then again, if you're in a non-governmental 457B, you want to look at the stability of your employer, right? If they're already entering bankruptcy, this is probably not an account you want to be using. Just skip it, invest in taxable, whatever. A 457B is usually one of the last retirement accounts you're going to use anyway. You've usually, maxed out a 401k or 403B. Maybe you have a solo 401k if you got some side gig income, backdoor Roth IRA for you and your spouse if you're married. Your spouse's retirement accounts, all that stuff usually comes before you would fund a 457B anyway. You can always invest more in taxable if it makes you nervous at all, or you can just, fund it halfway or fund it for a couple of years. It's not like it's an all or none decision, but keep that in mind. Now, 457Bs do have some catch-up options. They're different from what you see in a 401k and a 403B, so read your plan document carefully to see what options you might have there. But as a general rule, the contribution limit on these is $22,500 in 2023. So it's basically, this is a completely separate $22,500 than what went into your 401k or 403B. It's totally different. It doesn't share that limit. It doesn't share any limit with any other account. It's just another great, usually tax deferred, retirement account that you can use to help you to save for retirement. Another great thing about 457Bs is the age 59 and a half rule does not apply. So when you combine that with the fact that it's technically still your employer's money, this is often the first thing people spend in retirement. If you're into FIRE, if you want to retire early, a lot of times what you'll spend that first 5 years is your 457B money. Would be pretty typical. So if you have a 457B, you probably want to use it, but look into the details. The devil is in the details, and make sure you understand what you are investing in.
The hosts of The White Coat Investor are not licensed accountants, attorneys, or financial advisors. This podcast is for your entertainment and information only. It should not be considered professional or personalized financial advice. You should consult the appropriate professional for specific advice relating to your situation.